All right, welcome back, everyone. This is The End of the World with Michael and Stu.
I'm Michael.
And I'm Stu. And today we are talking about the cultural phenomenon that is The Last of Us, HBO prestige television series. But before we get into that, I just wanted to do a little bit of... I'll give you guys a little bit more information about who exactly it is that we are. I'm Stu. I'm a teacher. I teach at the university level, and I'm a writer. One of my main areas of academic interest is the environment and the way that climate change and other environmental disasters relate to the way authors sort of discuss these topics in their books. And I've been teaching a class that's about the environment and literature for the last 3 years, which is part of what qualifies me to be the host of this show. And Michael, what about you?
There's not much that qualifies me, but I like to describe myself as reasonably paranoid about the, what did I say last time? The impending apocalypse.
The nearing end of the world.
Yeah, I think that well, I'm a stand-up comic and also a writer, but I am certainly not an expert. Just generally, I am very concerned about what's going on and not really doing anything about it, if I'm being honest. Which also kind of, well, that's a whole nother topic. But
yeah, we'll talk about that more. I mean, I think
sure.
one of the things I come back to in my course a lot is that there are a lot of social pressures to sort of take individual responsibility for the climate crisis. Like, do your part. And a lot of that is pretty bogus. When you look at the climate crisis, for instance, from a macro perspective,
why do you think it's bogus?
Because if you lived a perfectly climate neutral existence for your entire life, you never polluted, you never littered, you never used any excess water, it would make absolutely no difference in the problems of the world, right? The only way that the climate crisis is going to be resolved is by action by large corporations and governments, right? Like
sure.
we as individuals have very little impact on that. And there's an anecdote I always tell in my classes about this, which is that I remember I was in college and a friend of mine was a big environmentalist. You know, this is early 2000s, so he was very cutting edge. You know, this wasn't like a cool thing to be. It was sort of, it was a form of like activism. And I remember one time I was at the dining hall, and I got up to get a second cup of coffee, and I returned to the table with a new mug, and he was like, "Stu, you couldn't have reused your mug? What, you just like want the earth to die?" And you know, I tell this anecdote because in that moment I like just wanted to do nothing more than like run out into the street and find a trash can and just like pour it into a river. because like by putting the responsibility for the environment solely on my like one utterly inconsequential minor in this very moralizing and judgmental way, it caused me to become so angry that I like actually wanted to do the opposite of what my friend was.
Sure, right.
So I don't know. I'm a little wary of these like calls for us to individually like own climate change when it's
I think I would say that's such a huge problem in any realm of our current political framework, right? It's like, to me, where I come down on that is more, I think the line between, you know, pointing out the rather obvious idea that individuals can't change things in any real macro sense, also does eat away at the sense of collective organization. I think people's will to do that and see what might be able to happen. You know, I think there's real...
No, I mean, obviously you're right. I mean, I think it is good to do your part. But I think when you start shifting into like morally blaming people in the manner that I just described, that can have a like reverse. People tend to not respond well to being like hectored.
Right. And I do sort of think that there's this kind of sleight of hand that's, not to be
Well,
too
no, I mean, I think
conspiratorial,
that's
but
it.
these
No,
these large
that's
corporations,
100%.
these
No,
governments, they reduce it to the individual level
exactly.
precisely to avoid any type of popular
Accountability on
will,
their
any
part.
type of accountability.
That is exactly right. And that's why I'm skeptical of these like government or corporate like backed like everyone pitch in, you all do your part sort of endeavors, because clearly it's an attempt to exculpate or exonerate themselves from the actual guilt that is like
Classic,
95% on their
yeah,
shoulders.
classic Fedra behavior.
Yeah, yeah. I mean, that does kind of bring us into one of the dynamics that we see in this show. So, what before we get like into the talking about individual episodes or characters or anything like that, like what's your experience with zombies in general? Because this is essentially a zombie show, right?
Well, yes, I would say that my experience with all of like that entire genre of sort of like horror um apocalypse, I have completely ignored my entire life.
Okay.
No interest in at
So
all.
you're not like a
Uh,
horror fan, or
just like forever couldn't do any type of zombie movie without just instantly discarding it.
tuning out.
It's very similar. That my relationship to The Last of Us is actually very similar to my relationship with Game of Thrones,
Okay.
which is I could never watch fantasy in a
Uh-huh.
million years. Would never read it, do Dungeons and Dragons, all this shit. And when it came out, everyone's telling me how, oh, you got to watch Game of Thrones, and I'm like, man, it's fucking dragons and shit. I'm not going anywhere near that. And
Uh-huh.
then eventually, a few seasons in, I'm like, okay, there's so many people saying
So
that I watch
you
it.
caved to
Okay.
mass pressure. You felt
I
the
really, I really am, I think, the perfect target demographic for like this move,
towards
from
to prestige.
fantasy and zombie movie type, yes, into the prestige world. And my last stand probably was Walking Dead. I did not watch a second of Walking Dead,
Yeah,
even
yeah.
though it kind of is an important precursor
Forerunner.
to this.
Yeah, yeah. I
Yeah,
think it's funny you say that about Game of Thrones. Like, I had a friend who was a rabid fan of the books. And I, unlike you, have always liked horror movies, have always liked fantasy, read literally hundreds of fantasy novels as a kid. Uh, could not tell you a single thing about any of the plots, but it's part of growing older, I guess. But I had a friend who he was like, Stu, you're gonna love this. And there was something again about his like rabid enthusiasm that for the first year of Game of Thrones, I was like, not for me, no thanks.
sure. Yeah.
Again,
You're peer pressured. You're peer pressured out of enjoying the
yeah,
show,
exactly.
right?
Which is a funny kind of phenomenon. And then eventually, I too caved and watched it. I didn't. Similarly to you, I did not watch Walking Dead when it initially came out. I did eventually during the pandemic watch, I think, the first 5 or 6 seasons of it, just because
Sure.
there's a lot of episodes of this. And I even read the comic on which it's based, which is from early 2000s, written by a guy called Robert Kirkman, who's like a very influential sort of indie comics guy, now one of the owners of Image Comics. And the show is pretty faithful to the comic. I think it's a decent show, especially the first season, which was directed by Frank Darabont, who's like a good, legit, has a reputation director of horror and other things. And then he had some kind of disagreement with AMC or the network, and he left. And after
Sure.
that, I think the show kind of descends into a more typical monster of the week, zombie of the week, as the case may be.
Right. Well, I think that's like we spoke in the first episode about the movement of these apocalyptic genres into prestige television, high production movies, sort of like Oscar bait, even potentially.
Yeah,
And
yeah.
I think that's the shift. It's like, Walking Dead did break into
Mainstream
that
popularity.
that realm, but it's still, it's AMC, and Last of Us is kind of the real apex. It's like it got the big thing. It got all the money to
Got
do it on
to
HBO,
HBO, yeah.
and sort of speaks to what we've been talking about earlier, which is just that, this type of movie, this type of content, uh, has now just reached the highest levels of
The apogee.
American televisual and cinematic culture,
That's
right?
right. And I think the timing of the show coming out as it did in January 23, obviously, given that it's 3 years after COVID, roughly, there's a it sort of is able to feed off of a lot of the worst impulses of the sort of response to the COVID pandemic. In as much as, this is a show that's based on a pandemic, obviously. In this case, it's a fungal pandemic. Cordyceps, right, is this type of real life fungus that infects insects in such a way that it kind of takes over their nervous systems. And you see these little worms and snails and beetles and things that have this like mushroom kind of tail growing out of their heads, and they're moving around, but the insect is effectively dead, but the fungus is in charge. And this sort of transplants that idea. What if humans became vulnerable to this kind of infection? And obviously we had a pandemic, we had lockdowns, nothing nearly as serious as what we see in the show. Thank goodness. But
well, unless you believe what Aaron Rodgers is saying.
No, yeah.
The 5G has gotten inside of us.
Yeah. No, I mean, exactly. Like, I think that's sort of what the show, in some ways, is feeding off those impulses, right? It's showing, like, a real lockdown, right? There is a real fascist government that has taken over in the aftermath of this. And it's been going for 20 years, right? And people are living in these quarantine zones where there are these military police. There's very limited resources. We'll get into this a little bit more in a second, but the one other thing I wanted to discuss was the video game. You unlike me, have some experience of actually playing the video game, right?
So I am a truly horrible video game player. Attention span, all of that. I just have never. It's sort of similar to waiting on
fantasy
Game of Thrones and Walking Dead. I really just played FIFA. Couldn't do anything else.
Yeah.
And my brother got into video games like this, and my friends got into video games like this, and I was like, this is so stupid. And I did play it before the show came out.
Okay.
And made it, what would take a normal video game player maybe an hour and a half into the game. But the first time I had to try to get through a group of zombies, I just quit the game. And but then once I saw the show, I was like, oh, I should
go back,
get through the story. I'm now attached to the story, so I'll go back. And I did make it not far. I mean, I can't. I got probably to episode 3 of the TV show,
okay.
Where you meet the Nick Offerman prepper guy.
Okay, yeah.
And I just am bad. I'm just really bad. But, it is interesting that both this, like you said, the timing of the show with COVID, but this was obviously all in the video game.
Right. The video game came out, I think, 10 years before the show. I think it's 2013 was the first.
And it's considered
version.
One of
the best.
I think considered one of the best video game stories of all time.
Oh yeah,
right?
Yeah.
Like, people are obsessed with it. But as I started going back through the game, you start to see what is this still weird part of this culture, I think, of fan service and faithfulness.
Oh,
right?
Which is in the show, you mean?
People going online and talking about what gets ignored, what's get excluded. Game of Thrones did this a ton,
with
obviously,
the books,
but
right?
Yeah, and a lot of credit is being given, if I remember correctly, to The Last of Us for wow, this shot is exactly like the shot in the video game. There's sequences that are really the exact same. It's so funny to me.
It's like, wow, they copied it so faithfully.
Wow, yeah, you cribbed the actual game. Of course, the creator of the game is obviously involved with the show, so it makes sense. But I think it's one of the things that keeps you interested in the plot and keeps you kind of on the edge of your feet. But also one of the failings ultimately of the show is when you rewatch it after playing the video game. What I found is a little too faithful. It feels like a video game too often to me. Even the dialogue will be truncated, and it'll be like, Joel, move. It'll sound exactly like
an NPC is chiming in or something.
Yes, and to me, I think that sort of came through more after I'd played the video game. But I think it's important to note that video games in general of this variety were huge in helping lift this genre. We like to talk about it's because people are concerned about the end of the world and
Right.
all of this stuff. But ultimately, you also have the market forces of video game fans and the idea of apocalypse video games, Fallout. There's a ton.
Yeah. It's a big
Also has
genre.
helped drive this phenomenon into the realms of television and movie that we're now talking about.
Yeah, and I think, especially in the sort of wake of the Marvel movie adaptations, are sort of running that well is running dry, so to speak, right?
Yeah.
They've adapted a lot of the big stories. A lot of the original star actors have been priced out and have moved on to other projects. And so the industry as a whole is kind of feeling around for like, where's the next IP
Right.
source
What
that
universe can we extend?
Yeah, exactly. Well said. And I think video games are a logical
Yeah.
because video games I think I heard this on the American Prestige podcast recently. They are an even bigger market than film. Like more money is spent per annum on the video game like industry than in Hollywood, which is kind of shocking, right? I mean, just in terms of talking about prestige,
It's one of those things that's shocking until
you think about it and
hear
you're
it,
like,
and
oh
then it
yeah,
makes total
it
sense
totally
now.
makes sense. But video games are still a relatively new phenomena, right? I mean, Nintendo
Right.
Entertainment System, the first massively successful. That's the mid '80s.
Well, that's the last thing I would say about the TV or the video game, having gone through and played a chunk of it,
Yeah.
is that the critique I just gave about how the dialogue or the shots translate directly to some of the TV show. In fairness, I also hadn't played like a role-playing
Like
video game
a video
story
game since
in
the
years.
'90s or whatever.
And like it's really well written. It's you really do care about these
Oh
people.
yeah, yeah,
And I hadn't really experienced that in the video game world because I'm just playing like, FIFA or Madden or something.
sure.
But like, wow, like my brother was telling me he's finished the game and he was telling me like how affected he was by the actual video. He's playing it and like he's moved
Uh
genuinely by the character that he's being, and I wish I could experience that. It could, it'd be interesting to relate to that on the podcast. But I think that really does happen because the writing and the production value is so good in these things
oh
now.
yeah.
That in many ways the stories are developed way better than a half an hour or hour television show or a 90-minute or 2 hour movie.
Yeah, I think that makes perfect sense, and we're just old, so we,
Yes.
we it's not your Super Mario Brother plot anymore, where
Yeah.
oh, I'm sorry, the princess is in the next castle is
Right.
like the extent of the
There's
sort of plot development in the.
Controllers have more than two buttons. I just like that. They lost me there.
Yeah, it's like I'm out. All right, so let's get into the show itself. I think what's
Sure.
interesting about this show is that it sort of uses the apocalypse or the apocalyptic scenario that's playing out in this world as a kind of backdrop over which to explore multiple different genres of story, right?
Mm-hmm.
And or it also with each episode kind of explores a different response that a community or group of characters is having to the kind of apocalyptic scenario that is playing out. So the first episode is great fake out, right? We meet Joel's daughter, who we think is going to be the protagonist of the show. She's like this intelligent young woman. She's trying to get this watch fixed for her dad. There's like this little
Right.
plot.
Her dad's not the particularly responsible. He's not a deadbeat, but he needs his daughter to help him with the cooking and the cleaning and that
Yeah, and
type
we
of
don't
thing.
see the mother in the picture. We meet Joel's brother. And it's, I think, 2003 that the show starts off, right? And then
Yep.
we're basically witnessing the day of the outbreak of the cordyceps infection. And the first signs that something's wrong are there's that old lady who's in a wheelchair, right? She's kind of twitching, and right? We get these like sort of little hints that like something
And
is
the
off.
watch guy's wife comes out
And
and
she's
is
like, "We
like,
have to
"Go home."
go." Yeah, we're closing, and
Yeah.
he's like, "Well, let me give
No,
her the watch."
she doesn't give any information to information.
Yeah, yeah. She's just like, "Get out of
She's just
here.
like,
We're
you know what you
closed."
should do? Go home. You'll figure it out later. Go home.
And then very quickly we start to see signs of something seriously wrong. Right? There are military jets flying over. Basically, chaos erupts almost immediately. The daughter goes into the other neighbor's house where we've seen her. She has a positive relationship with these people in an early scene, and there's one of them is just feasting on the neck of another one, right? And there are spores like growing out of the mouth, and it's immediately clear like the zombie apocalypse, as it's commonly referred to.
Right. By the time Joel returns home to, get back to the daughter, it's all systems go, like get in the car.
Yeah,
Like
yeah. And they attempt to
the
flee.
worst
And
is
this
happening.
is the scene where the video game adaptation for me came through really strongly when they're like driving through the
Oh yeah.
town. And I haven't played the game, but I could just tell like something
The pilot by far feels the most
indebted to the
like the
game.
video game, and I
Yeah.
think it's just amazing for a pilot. It really brings you. It's like the shots of them driving forward, then driving backward, like
And then a plane
all of
crashes
that.
into the
Yeah,
town and
yeah.
it's just like, okay, wow, this is I mean it's what but like when you watch this like when you start seeing planes like falling out of the sky, like there's no coming back from this, right? Like this is just
Right.
it isn't like just my initial thought was like, okay, like everyone is dead. Like
Yes.
this is not
And I think that is like one of the problems, like, to explore in the show is like, you know, would this many people be okay 20 years later?
I
I
mean,
don't buy that.
we don't have a strong sense of what the Earth's population that's uninfected is, do we?
We don't, but we do have like a level of infrastructure that I'm even very
That
dubious
you're
about. The
skeptical would.
chances, just because when I saw the pilot, it's all happening so in the matter of minutes, it's
Yeah,
getting so bad
yeah.
that like if I extrapolate out to like a fortnight, I'm thinking I'm thinking there's like, and they do an okay job about, dealing with some of the supply chain problems that would come up, and they
Yeah.
can't find a ton of stuff, and it's more
So
trading
it's a
and
more
bartering and
realistic
stealing.
depiction than Arrival in that regard.
Absolutely.
The response.
Absolutely. But I
I
still have a bit of a leap believing in 20 years you'd have QZs and governments at all in this
yeah.
with this
That
type
that
of illness, you know.
that's sort of what I was feeling as I was watching the initial sequence unfold. Just like, all right, this, and there's like military guys, but like one of the mysteries is, at least initially, what is the mechanism of this infection? I think we learned in a later episode that it got into some wheat plant or something, right?
It
And
was
then,
like a sugar grain,
yeah,
I think,
yeah, yeah.
factory in Indonesia, I believe, where they,
Right, but
right? Isn't that where it starts?
but it also, it seems to have gotten into the food of, and we see the old lady who's the first infected. We see she's eating like a biscuit, and they're like,
Yeah.
Joel, don't you want one of these biscuits? And Joel's like, no, thanks. And I
Yeah.
think it's sort of implied that if Joel had just been like, oh yeah, sure, that he would have fallen prey as well.
Right. I mean, that is kind of one of the interesting things I think about the show is that they do leave space for not really knowing for sure
It
what
doesn't
happened.
over-explain. It doesn't make the
20 years
mistake.
later, all you get is the one episode where Joel is explaining the sort of what he at least portrays to Ellie
What he
is the
understands.
commonly
Yeah,
accepted, but we don't even know if that's true. But like it got into the food supply, we don't even know if that's what
right.
actually happened.
Another thing that we didn't talk about is that the show opens with this weird cold open where it's in the 60s, right? And it's this TV show and they're
Yeah, I
talking.
love that part.
Like, I don't understand what that's. I mean, I
And it's
guess.
like what's the guy like Big Head or whatever from Silicon Valley is
Oh, yeah, yeah, yeah.
just cast as the host almost inexplicably. It's like a sort of one of those like kind of goofy hosts of that era
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
that were
Yeah,
like doing real interviews but were kind of quirky,
yeah,
and
yeah,
he
yeah.
like plays that to the extreme.
Like
Everything's deadpan.
Mike Douglas or something like that.
Yeah,
Or
right,
one
right,
of the
right.
60s, 70s hosts. What do you think that's doing in the show? Is it just for background? Like, it's
Yeah,
like
I mean, I wonder if
we've known about this for a
that,
long time and have done nothing. Is it like a metaphor for climate change? Is it a, Like,
it just feels like, I mean, I think it looks ridiculous, but I could understand that it felt to the writer, to the creator,
like
like
we need to
clean
ground
and
this.
tight.
We need to give this
It's
background.
quick.
Yeah, it's very
Yeah, and
short.
it's like there's no explanation. And obviously, no one in the world reacted to this idea, which I do think I actually like. I
Yeah,
mean, it was 1968. It just felt like some crackpot, right? It was portrayed as some crackpot
everyone's like,
being
oh ho
like,
ho ha ha.
yeah,
Right, and that's around the time that people began to think about climate change. I think the first studies, or even a little earlier than that. So in a way, it's like big corporations like Mobil, Exxon, or whatever have known that carbon emissions were causing climate change since at least the
right.
early 70s, if not even earlier, and have done nothing about it and have in fact worked diligently to suppress knowledge of this.
Yeah, I mean, to
Much
me,
in the way that tobacco companies do about cancer and things.
sure,
It's
sure, that's right.
so there's like a long history of like, let's keep this under the wraps as long as we possibly
Yeah,
can.
I mean, for me, the pilot could just as easily have happened without the sequence.
Yeah, I agree.
It
So
was a bit of fun.
eventually the daughter is killed by a military man who
Yeah.
mistakenly, in the chaos, the fog of war, sort of shoots Joel and his daughter. The daughter is killed. Joel doesn't die. They're rescued by the brother. And then we jump forward 20 years. And so this death of the daughter is like the defining character trait for Joel, right? And
Oh, yes.
we see him almost unchanged. I mean, he looks older, of course, but it's, like 20 years later, he's made his way to Boston. He's living in what we come to learn is called a quarantine zone, which is run by this fascist state, which is called Fedra, which seems to be the remnants of the U.S. government, such as it was. And a lot of this to me was like pretty standard post-apocalypse stuff, right? Like, the only state that can rise in the aftermath is a fascist state.
Yeah, it feels very simplistic in order to get them on the road.
Right. It creates an
You know,
antagonism.
right. And
Right.
that is a great point. That like in the conception, in the imagination of in almost all of this type of content, the imagination goes to like, of course it's a fascist state.
Like, what do you mean?
Right.
A non-fascist? No, that's literally
Yeah.
impossible. Right?
Right.
Well, so who's going to watch out for capitalism if not,
Right.
fascism?
And who's gonna like control the situation? It would just be lawless.
Yeah.
And we can't have that, in a world where you could die at any second from like a nick from a zombie. But
No, exactly. All right.
we better clamp down and keep this project going.
So let's move through the episodes like relatively quickly. I don't want to like get bogged down in too much plot summary. I'm assuming people who are listening have either watched the show or are planning to or played the game.
Sure.
The main character, aside from Joel, is Ellie. I think it's good that there are two characters in this show, right? And there are other characters we meet along the way, but they are very ancillary to these, like the central duo. And I think that's kind of refreshing. A lot of the other prestige shows on HBO have had a larger cast, have sort of the Sopranos family, the family at 6 Feet Under. It's like, this is just
Game of Thrones,
the Game of Thrones, which is like just hundreds of characters, right? So the main conflict is there are the bad guys, Fedra, there's the Fireflies, they're rebels. Ellie is immune to the cordyceps infection. And
so we are led to believe.
That's what we find out, right? She's been bitten by an infected but did not become a zombie. Joel is hired essentially to take Ellie out west to this Firefly installation where there are scientists who are working on a cure and they just need someone like her, and they're gonna, draw out her blood and develop a vaccine, and the world will be saved, right?
And what do you know? Joel wants to find his brother.
And Joel's brother happens to be out in that area as well, right?
Go hunt him down after 20 years. I think I'm really going to go west this
time.
Well,
I don't think we know entirely how long they've been separated. Yeah. So they get out on the way, and initially I don't think Joel even knows that she's immune to the... Right? That's kind of like...
Yeah.
Like Marlene, who's like the Firefly leader, is like, just get her out there.
Yeah.
And
it's hidden.
Her mother's out there or something. There's some kind of excuse given. And she gets bitten early on, right? And again, for a second time. and doesn't fall.
And when they get like caught right when they're leaving the QZ,
a Fedra agent catches them.
She registers as sick, and they're ready to kill her.
Logic.
Joel and Tess.
But she then shows that, oh look, I have a scar, been bit before, whatever. The second episode, again, has a little bit of a flashback opening, setting things in Indonesia for some reason. There was a lot of blowback against this, right, when it came out.
Yeah.
It was like, why are we rooting this?
Which I think is fair.
I think so, too. Like, why have it be...
point.
Have it be another Asian-originating virus when there's such a nasty anti-Asian sentiment that arose when COVID happened. And this is like
you can invent any scenario.
Right. Here. It could be in Kansas. It could be in Iceland. It could be anywhere. Right. And yet no, let's go back to Asia. It feels misguided and a little bit ugly. But yeah, we get more info on the cordyceps. They in the second episode they're escaping from Boston, right? And they go through where else but like the Museum of Patriotism, right? Which is overrun by zombies and the most dreaded kind of zombie of all, the clicker, which is like this echolocating like target zombie, right? And this feels very video game, right? You're like, okay, so we've got the like level 1 bad guys. Okay, this is like the mini boss bad guy, right?
Yep.
And then there's going to be like a third type of zombie we meet later. You know, it's all fine. Tess, Joel's seeming girlfriend and helper, gets infected in their escape from the museum and valiantly sacrifices herself so Joel and Ellie like might carry the mission forward, which again
might save the world. Save the world.
Yeah,
which is important for what's to come because ostensibly Joel is only going to do this to save the world because Tess is like, please go save the world.
Tess sacrificed herself.
So just to put that on the docket, she is willing to die for this.
Yeah,
very obviously like noble, but clearly like needed mission if this is possible.
I think it's good that you're lampshading this, as we say in the recap community. Okay, episode 3. It is finally a gay survivalist romance, what we've all been waiting for, and
was a phenomenon.
People love that episode.
It's a really affecting episode.
I think it's beautiful, but it is not without its problems, right? So Nick Offerman is like this celibate, very masculine prepper who's built a literal bunker under his home before the apocalypse.
Hard to say. Would you say he's incel or volcel? Seems
I think incel, but also just in the closet too, right?
And also incel, but not with all the negative.
Right, and with some of the negative baggage, right? He has like a room full of guns in his house, and is like ready to.
Fair enough.
When he finally meets the one man he will end up spending his life with, he's ready to murder him, like within seconds of catching him in his trap.
He begrudgingly gives him lunch, right?
Yeah.
It's his first peace offering.
Right, and although he's a gay person who's been completely isolated from other gay people and gay culture for the most part, he still knows everything about like what wine to pair with rabbit.
Right, which is quickly pointed out to make clear that he is in fact gay.
Right, which is like, you know, that's not something that gay people just inherit from. I think I was talking to you about this before. There's a moment in The Sopranos in the final season with Vito, the gay mobster character, who, kind of like Nick Offerman, is a very masculine. You know, he's a mafioso. We see him beating guys up. We see him doing all sorts of murders to people. Eventually goes on the run because he's outed. And he's in an antique shop, and he says, "Oh, this is a nice pot." And the gay antique shop owner is like, "That's the most valuable piece in the whole store. You've got a great eye," which again kind of plays into this idea that like gay people just magically can like rate,
have great taste.
Yeah. But as you say, like, I think the story does. Despite that, it is a good story. You know, it
is, but it's also like I think an important example of the way that like Americanness will permeate basically any of our cultural products, right? The "Don't Tread Me" flag, the complete inability to conceive of putting all this time into this. I would assume for way longer than the actual
Oh yeah,
apocalypse. So he
yeah,
was
yeah.
clearly preparing for something.
Yeah.
And he couldn't conceive of helping to have other people survive it, despite this incredible amount of resources that he had prepared. And then when it happens, it's almost this gleeful libertarian moment, in
Right.
fact, for him.
Right.
The music
I
is
was
very
right.
upbeat.
I was right. You were
He's
wrong.
banging through the like natural gas. He's driving his car through the fence. It's all
Yeah.
very exciting. He's going to the liquor store and getting all the wine. He's like, everything's so fun
Yeah.
because you are alone on the land
And he was right.
no government, no constraints. Everything's going to work out for just me. And although was very affected, I thought it was a quite like lovely episode of TV. His lesson that he learns is so funny because he writes the letter
Yeah.
to Joel after they die and says, I learned that there's one person, you find one person worth saving, and to hell with all those motherfuckers. And you're like, okay, well, first of all, that's not how you actually started. You started by wanting to save nobody.
Yeah.
And thankful the first thing you try to do is kill the guy who ended up being like the sweetest person in the history of the world.
Yeah.
And then despite that opening your horizons, that there is someone worth saving.
You've still not expanded.
Then stop there.
Yeah, exactly.
Yes. You refuse to like be nice to Joel and Tess when they come. You put your gun out.
Literally has a gun on the table the whole dinner.
So like, we go on this emotional journey where this man learns to love, but he
learns to love only one person.
In the most American way. It is one person, still the fence. He's not helping. And like
there's a one-man war with the raiders.
No one else comes by. No one else comes by for help in 20 years. And if they do, we're never
he kills them.
We never see how we never see how Nick Offerman's character is supposed to react. Because one would assume if his lover showed up, I would say, let's say one per year is coming.
Sure.
Okay. What's the story of these other 20 people? It's like, did he give them one steak and then tell them to go the way he was going to until
well, I think it seems like once his boyfriend comes, he's even worse. Because
the boyfriend wanted friends.
Right.
Would he,
But, as we saw with the Joel relationship, it's really hard he becomes even more psychotically defensive with having the gun at their lunch. To me is
the big
it's very American.
It's like my favorite part of the whole series, I think.
Yeah.
Is just the way in which we talked about this with the Arrival thing. It's like these writers imagine and conceive of something very interesting, but then don't confront the obvious flaw in this, which is that the saddest thing about this character is that he was never able to help more people. Why didn't he become the Oscar Schindler of this area?
No, totally. It's ridiculous. But luckily he does leave a car and some goods for Ellie and Joel, and they finally commence the on the road portion of the series. They head out west, and Joel doesn't take a lot of stuff. He takes one gun, some canned goods.
It takes too little. I don't get it. Just fill your truck up.
Yeah. Doesn't really make sense. Eventually they reach Kansas City, right? Which has been liberated from the fascist Fedra. But bad news. It's been replaced by even worse fascists, and a fascist led by a mom.
Right? Well, because look, any popular revolution that reacts to a fascist government, I don't know if you heard, Stu, but it inevitably becomes an even worse version. That's the only way it can go.
Yeah. I think Melanie Linsky is the actress who plays Kathleen, who's the dictator of Kansas City, newly self-appointed. I think she's great. She's also in that show Yellow Jackets. She's a really good actress. And there is something funny about her kind of soft-spoken, well, they murdered my brother. You're just what's going on here? We also meet...
But isn't that I think that's kind of just an important quick thing to note, right? Is that that because of the nature of, and the strength of it is the pair, right?
Mm-hmm.
Joel and Ellie are amazing to watch together.
Right.
But when you're talking about social reconstruction in the
Aftermath of this pandemic.
In the aftermath and continued reality of an apocalyptic event, the people who are still, like, even the people who are going to toe to toe with the fascist government are still stuck in this like vengeance trail
right. I
that
mean,
they have to do.
she's single-mindedly focused on this guy, Henry.
We must find Henry. Just
Henry
let Henry go and get
who
killed
cares?
by a zombie.
Yeah, who cares about Henry? Like,
build the society that you've been working on.
Yeah.
Like, what, you just did the thing.
Yeah.
Wait, who cares? Make him go away. It doesn't matter. Everybody's dying. Everyone's kids are dead. Everybody's
Why
been
the
taken
single-minded vengeance, despite,
right? Like, especially as like a,
and as we see in the
biggest
episode,
flaw is that the brother is like, don't do that. The brother we're led to believe is almost like a messianic figure.
Her dead brother.
Yeah, he forgives. He wants to forgive Henry. He wanted to build something great in
but
the
he's
world.
dead.
And
he was betrayed by Henry, and
now she can't help it. She can't even help it. She just has to.
Right. She like sits in her childhood bedroom and is like.
So all of these people who were trying to create some sort of popular overthrow, they now all have to go on this mission with her, and she gets them trapped in.
And they were killed.
Their demise.
Right. Yes, like her single-minded obsession with Henry leads to the entire destruction by an underground zombie cell erupts, and there's even a giant zombie that comes out. Pretty scary.
Pretty cool. That part's pretty cool.
Yeah. And of course, once again, we meet Henry and his brother, Sam, who is...
That part is rough,
It's brutal. It's brutal. He's really... he is actually a deaf person, right? A hearing impaired actor. And I think the show does a lot of good work in including people who are differently abled and who have different... it's like... It's refreshing, and it didn't face as much blowback as shows sometimes do when they attempt to be more inclusive. Which I think is interesting. I'm not sure exactly why.
Well, I think it. I mean, again, as with much of the show, these moments are very effective. They're very good. I mean, like, it's a rough and really interesting watch, but the video gameness of it all that sort of is the backbone of this.
Well, there's like a monster of the week quality to each episode in the way that there are monsters in each level.
And whenever you see someone redeeming, very early in the show, you realize that they're just going to be a sad thing.
Yeah.
And it just, because that's the way that, I mean, the video game works, and, obviously much of writing in this form anyway, but it's the biggest problem with the show and is it's very telegraphed. So when you meet this pair, it's almost like
that kid is dead, right? Like the instant
that kid is gone. And it's the same way that there's so many moments in the show where they go, it's been a while since we've seen some infected. We're getting a little relaxed here, and we're getting to know each other.
You just know us.
Oh no! Yeah. Don't say that. You never know what's around the corner.
I'll be right back in a horror movie, right? Like.
But it's carried by these incredibly strong performances. Whether I mean, like I said, like the Nick Offerman character, it really both of them. The couple is incredible.
They're great.
I think
the acting is
really
great.
Good job.
Yeah,
and the brothers are fantastic as well.
Yeah, and Ellie and Joel are both fantastic. I mean, obviously. So moving forward, Ellie and Joel are getting really tight. They're forming a kind of father-daughter bond. They reach Wyoming, where Joel's brother is. And so in the last episode, we had a fascist overthrow of Fedra by worse fascists. In this, we have communists, right? They've set up their communist town, and they're protecting their town by spreading rumors about something horrible there, but there isn't anything horrible. I mean, aside from communism, which is the most horrible thing an American could possibly imagine. But the town has power. They have movies. They have civilization. It feels I mean, if I were Joel, I would just stay in the town.
He tried
with Ellie. Well, with Ellie.
Yeah, I mean, but like, she's pretty determined at this point
to get to the
which gets to like just how shitty a guy Joel is, I think. But she really wants to do this, and he, I think, is finding out he can't. This is, to me, the best part of his story is, instead of like the superhero who's dragging Ellie to success, he's becoming a hindrance and he's being
He
forced to
tries
reckon with his mortality. It's really
he
interesting,
tries
this
to
part, I
pawn
think.
Ellie off on his brother. He says, "Hey, my brother's better at this. He
Right.
knows the
But I think
territory."
genuinely, yes, I think he's like, you'll be safer. And I like, there's like, my back hurts.
And he's
He's
also
like, my
like, but
back,
he's also, I think,
my heart hurts.
he's getting too close to her also, right? And she's breaking down
Yeah.
that carapace of distance that he developed for himself after the death of his own daughter.
Right.
He doesn't want to be close to
Right.
anyone.
But
He's lost Tess, his friends, the Nick Offerman
sure.
character. They're like everyone he knows is essentially dead, and he knows that if he
Right.
continues to be close to Ellie, she's going to die too, and that's just going to.
Well, and I think ultimately, looking at the whole piece, the idea I think is that if he just gives her to Tommy now, then she can go save the world.
Yeah.
Because if I keep going, I'm not going to be able to
I'm not going to be able to say goodbye.
give her away.
Yeah, exactly. And
which again, very, very telegraphed. But again, I mean, it's all very interesting. I mean, the communist utopia thing it's weird because they do a good job of not having this really dark thing behind it, particularly, which is usually the case with these.
Well, right. I mean, I think it's fascinating that like it's not there isn't some
Right.
evil dictator who's in like the Wizard of Oz or someone who's controlling everyone, right? Like
Right.
and
I wonder how many portrayals on American television
of communism have been this positive.
Economic and social setup have been this positive.
Probably zero.
And it's obviously just
it's communism's big breakthrough.
Right. They finally got on HBO.
30 years after the fall of the Soviet Union, it's like, all right, we can have like one town that's in the middle
for one episode.
That's in a zombie wasteland. Like, they're that's okay. That's not a threat anymore.
Yeah.
So the next episode, after Joel decides to take Ellie, after all, they get to the university. It's abandoned. It's overrun with monkeys, chimps. Joel is stabbed, right? And then we have this episode where Ellie is tending to Joel in a kind of abandoned house somewhere, but there's the episode's a flashback to the night that Ellie was infected. And I think, like, as I was talking about, like, one of the things that I think the show is about is a nostalgia for a pre-internet world, right?
Yeah.
And we sort of really see that in this episode. It's like, what if society stopped in 2003? We never had Facebook. We never had Twitter. We never had YouTube. We never, like what if, and what stopped it? Well, destruction of most of civilization.
Well, and also you'd reach this point, right, where the way that consumerism has moved.
Yeah.
Right, where the mall originally had destroyed the mom and pop downtowns.
Right. And now the mall itself, mall in turn has been destroyed by the big box retailer.
Box stores. And then big box retailers are destroyed by Amazon. And so everything, like now, there are towns where Walmart is like a quaint thing worth saving. And there are towns where the mall is something that you need to go to.
Right.
And it's interesting that because of that, I think the nostalgia that you're speaking of, it's like the mall, for someone who hasn't seen it, it's portrayed in this beautiful.
It's religious.
This is the most beautiful thing I've ever seen. Whereas, like, there's a world where you could have portrayed it like you were writing for Adbusters instead. Like, look at this ruin that shows us exactly why we fell or whatever.
Right, but it's not that at all. Instead,
it's not that at all.
It's a temple of. It's the seven wonders of the world. Right.
That's right.
She tours her around the mall, shows her all the arcade. Right. Even the escalator becomes an almost magic, thing.
But this is where part of it sort of falls apart to me. It's like,
go on, yeah.
She is considered this great hider or jumper around at night, so she gets recruited by the Fireflies.
Oh, her friend? Yeah.
Yeah, the friend is because she's just really good at moving around. So first, it's weird because I would have assumed that these two best friends were hopping around together a lot. And then when she tries to recruit, she's like, please let Ellie become a Firefly. They're just like, no. And it's like, I'm sorry, what's their recruiting practice?
Well,
like,
I think we learn later that the Fireflies, Marlene, they already know who Ellie is and have this plan for her, right?
Yeah, but why, like...
So they're not going to just let her go off to, like, Georgia or wherever.
Well, no, but why wouldn't she then be brought under the wing? Wouldn't you want...
Yeah.
It seems like a seamless way to go into it if I'm the Fireflies.
Just like send her west with...
No, but like you've got the best friend, right? Yeah. And it's like the best friend just happens to be like, oh, the one who's immune, can she join? And then you could have been like, yeah, we'll post her in Eugene, Oregon,
or
or
wherever it is
whatever.
they're going. Yeah.
Instead, it's like, no, we'll come find you and deal with you later. It just felt a little weird.
Okay, yeah, I think that's right. There's also a tension between Ellie and her friend. Ellie is a rebel, as we've seen throughout the show, but she's also kind of a rule follower at heart or something. And the friend,
it is very, very muddy.
It's kind of confused, right? The friend is like, I'm a firefly. And she's like, you're going to blow people up. But that's too far for me or something, right?
Yeah, the character she builds.
She sees that her friend has some bombs in her like hideout and
can't believe it. Repulsed.
She's like scandalized and disgusted. Yeah.
Despite having this intuition about everything about the world.
Yeah.
Right?
That, but in this case, she's just like, you've gone too far.
Right? You're going to join the terrorists?
Yeah. It feels very weird.
I don't understand that part. I mean, and she's not quite young enough for me to believe she's just been so effectively...
She's so naive or whatever.
Brainwashed
by
her training.
She's smart. That's her defining character.
And she's rebelling against...
She's beating people up in the Federalist school and stuff. It doesn't really clock for me.
This is a huge problem for the show, yeah.
But then the last stop on their little Wonders tour is the costume shop. So when they're dressed as monsters, what happens? They are attacked by real monsters.
And then become monsters.
The irony. It's a little heavy-handed. It is very sad.
It's very cute.
And also there's a sort of a romantic subtext to their relationship that is not really fully expressed, but it's just kind of it's there.
There's a kiss.
Yeah, there's a kiss, and
again, as with all of those moments in the show, they're probably my favorite parts of the show.
Well, they feel like real human moments of human connection in a time of disaster, right?
So I think that's like part of this move culturally is these movies that are based in this genre or shows that spend
they have
very little time with zombies.
Right, they have to. That's what I meant at the outset when I said like they use this as a like template to explore these other types of stories, right?
That's right.
So we have the sort of the gay love story. We have the Moby Dick story where Henry is her Moby Dick and she's gonna just throw her life away to kill him. We have the brothers happiness communist utopia story. Eventually, we move on to in episode 8 another genre, which is religious fanaticism. Right.
Yes.
So we've seen a fascist, we've seen communist, now we see a religious zealot, right? And this guy is awful. He's just great acting job. Just completely despised the character from the instant he sets foot on screen. He traps Ellie. She wants penicillin to help Joel. She gets it, but there's like a standoff, and it's very clear that these guys are going to hunt her down. And it's not that they know anything about her mission or anything. It's just that the guy is a monster who wants followers, and especially young female followers for, obvious reasons.
Right. And he does this pitch where it's like, you're so smart.
We can rule together
with me.
Yeah.
In an attempt to like...
Which feels like a classic abuser.
Manipulator, abuser behavior.
And it turns out...
I think that she is just... remarkable in this episode.
She's great
as an actor. I mean, she's just so amazing in the whole show.
She's incredible.
I love this performance. But like, that episode, she's just so like the killing when she kills him finally.
It's incredible, and it's
so good. The way she comes out of it, like traumatized, like all of that is so well acted. It sort of forgives for me the hilarious leaps of Joel's life being saved somehow.
So quickly.
Stabbed by some rusty pole or
like
something.
A baseball
that he
bat.
Rips out
like a bat.
of his own body.
Yeah. And then he just gets
a little... one string or something.
She gets a little penicillin and he's better. Right?
He's better. He's still grinding, but he's better. He somehow gets there. I mean, like, that part is, just so ridiculous.
When I rewatched it, I was like, oh, this is insane. Like, when I first saw it, I misremembered that he was, like, healing for days and days. No, it's like, no.
Well, because at the end, after he is stabbed, they try to play that one episode where it looks like maybe he's dead.
Yeah.
Right?
But
like when he's on the snowbank, but of course he's not.
No,
but
he's fine.
She just carries it. She just like...
She's killer.
Even all of the leaps they're making when she's downstairs with him in that basement, saving his life. The whole performance is fantastic.
A couple other things. cannibalism, right? Turns out these religious zealots are eating their dead.
Couldn't see that coming. That was
and I mean, like, cannibalism is one of the big apocalyptic genre tropes, right? That in the end times, we'll talk about it in some future things we're looking at. All right, we're nearing up on the end of time here. Let's talk about the ending, like that, because I think that's where the most interesting stuff happens. Like, they get to the Fireflies at last, and Marlene, the woman from Boston, has somehow beaten them out here. Not explained.
We can't spend too much time on that, but it is. Then why didn't you just bring?
It doesn't make any sense to me at all. Agreed. They're going to kill Ellie to get into her brain, to use her tissue to make a vaccine for the cordyceps infection.
To potentially be able to. It's never confirmed.
It's not entirely clear that they're going to succeed. That's right. But it's also not confirmed that they're going to fail, right? I mean, this could work.
All. Yep.
This could be the thing. And Joel will not do it, right?
Yeah, Joel really has not processed much of his life over the 20 years. Right?
I mean, Joel, I think we're to understand, Joel has this new daughter to replace the one he lost, who's the same age as the daughter was when she died.
He did not go to therapy over the last 2 decades. He says he has, there's still dreams, and it's over and over again. I fail. I let her down. And then there's a facsimile of his daughter, and he can't lose her, right?
He can't repeat it, right?
Right.
And
he can't. He's not processed.
And in order to prevent repeating that loss, he is literally willing to sacrifice the best chance for salvation for the entire human race,
right? Including like the people who are considered the good people worth saving.
Yeah.
Right. People like Tommy will actually be able to have a kid.
Yeah.
All of that. Like, there are people in his life.
And like, this is, as you said, the one thing Tess was like, save the world, Joel, right?
Tess wants the world saved, but he could have gone back to Tommy and been a really great uncle with no threat, a brand new world, having been the savior of the world, and have done what Ellie herself said she wanted to have happen.
Yeah.
Now, I think the one thing that gives him a glimmer of possible moral justification is that she wasn't told.
No, right.
But to me, the failing of the ending is like,
he should wake her up and be like, hey.
And ask and agree.
But by then, he's already murdered all the scientists.
Right. Hold someone at gunpoint and be like, we're going to wake her up and let her decide.
Right.
Instead,
he chooses for her.
He single-handedly destroys his relationship with this new daughter as well.
Right.
That's over.
Because when she wakes up, he's like, yeah, it didn't work. It turns out there's a bunch of people like you. And
where are my clothes? Why am I still in a hospital gown if everything was fine?
And he's like, and the last scene of the show is them as they return to Tommy's town or whatever.
Yeah.
There's she says, Joel, did everything that you tell me.
Swear to me.
Swear to me. Did that really happen? And he said, yeah, it did. So obviously,
but what's so inconsistent? What's so inconsistent with this is that he has existed in this nightmare of this mistake and guilt that he's had.
Yeah,
it's the only defining character.
So what does he do when
instantly does something that will make him guilty for the next 20 years?
Yeah.
And the time before, it was just like a really bad situation with a trigger happy federal agent.
Right.
This is also the chance to save mankind.
Yeah.
And, and now he has to deal with that guilt. And somehow we're supposed to believe. And again, like, ultimately, this is like the tie-in, I think, to where what the podcast is exploring often is, even in these apocalyptic conceptions and imaginations and in this world that has so much going for it, I think there are elements of the show that are great.
Yeah.
We still are led to believe that an even completely fabricated nuclear unit or familial connection will still trump all.
Yeah.
No matter what.
I think the way I would articulate that is that once again, we're led to this point where an individual is given the choice of the group or their individual desires and wants. And once again, they choose themselves, right? That the individuality is more important than even the salvation of all of humanity. A little different than Arrival, right? Because at the end of Arrival, Amy Adams has the doomed daughter. Here, Joel is like, I could save... She saves humanity and then still has her doomed daughter. Joel cannot give up the doomed daughter to save humanity, right? Like there's something, there's some kind of swirling.
It's obviously just they try to make it where he's so emotionally wrecked, and precisely because he hasn't actually processed his life, he makes this decision.
Yeah.
So that's what keeps you from fully not liking him. I mean, you still feel for him, I think, when he's doing this.
Yeah.
But again, it really just stretched the limits of how I think this. Yes. Yeah. And I think it's like, it's a lack of respect for her life because if she now thinks that she
and plus all
tried
the people
but failed to save the world.
Henry and his Sam who died, Tess who died, like
all these people.
Everything else that happened to them is rendered.
But that's when you come
meaningless.
back to what's really similar to the Offerman character in the end is that this
selfish
motto of there's
saving
one person worth saving, and fuck all these motherfuckers. Or
no, brilliant. That's really well said.
And then it comes right to the end, and he chooses
he does the same thing.
Everyone else's sacrifice. Fuck all those motherfuckers, and they happen to be his lover, the people who have saved his life. The
leader of the Fireflies, the only resistance to this fascist government. These nurses and scientists who he just shoots a doctor in the head.
Right. But that's also probably what, I haven't read about Last of Us 2, but I think, at the end of the day, this is television and they're not going to
just ignore that conflict. Yeah.
They've got to have a second season. And
that's what the second season is going to be about.
Now they can get into all the emotion. I'm sure the relationship falls apart, etc.
Yeah.
But again, they just can't quite. They can't quite get there.
Yeah, good show. I like it, but I agree with you. I think there's some of these leaps in logic and some of these problems that you've pointed out. I think kind of lessen my level of enjoyment on the second go.
But for us and for purposes of the show and just enjoying apocalyptic thinking, apocalyptic content, the episodes really do give you all of these different responses.
Yeah.
Which I think makes it really, to rewatch it in that way it was really interesting as we started talking about it.
Totally. So any other last thoughts on the show?
I will watch this show until its conclusion for sure.
Yeah.
Despite some of the problems I have with it, I think it is pretty exciting and at times genuinely affecting, I think. And
it's well made. It looks beautiful.
Yeah.
It's well scored, etc. All right. So what are we talking about for next week, Michael?
Well, next week we're going to try something a little different because we want to do film, we want to do TV, we want to do some literature, but we also do want to talk about our world sometimes and talk about, sometimes there'll be news items that we will bring up sort of on the beat of the apocalypse, but also events in our world that speak to the way we think about catastrophe or looming crises, right?
Exactly.
And people our age in particular, the choice, I think, is perfect for me. The phenomenon of the inconvenient truth and Vice President Al Gore and his early adopting of climate change advocacy and the way he was portrayed by the media and the way he was viewed by America is so incredible. And I think truly fascinating in terms of when it happened and what it suggests.
What's happening now in the way.
Absolutely. Yeah. And the phenomenon of this documentary, the hockey stick discourse and the discredit, all of it is pretty tragic, but also humorous. Al Gore is perfect, I think, to start our real world examination, I think.
That's great. All right. Well, I look forward to that, and we will see you all next week. I'm Stu.
And I'm Michael.
All right. Take it easy, guys. All right. That was our second episode, and we're just back to remind you all to like and subscribe. You can find the podcast anywhere you would normally get your podcasts. And you can follow us on Instagram at TheEndOfTheWorldWMS, and we'll have little snippets from future episodes up there, and you can get all of
maybe the odd meme.
Yeah, even a meme or two may appear. So follow us there, and
and any reviews and ratings obviously help. Can't lie.
Very well. So we'll be back next week to talk all things gore, and we'll see you then.